My sister stole my fiance for his potential years later. She lost everything she took. She married the man. She betrayed me, for but while their life fell apart, I built the future. She always thought should have been hers. My mother liked to say that my life finally made sense once I got engaged. And honestly, for a while, I let myself soak that in, like it was some kind of proof that I hadn't completely messed everything up. I was 31. I had a decent job as a marketing manager for a mid-sized company in a coastal city on the east side of the country. I had my own apartment that I could barely afford, but still loved. And I had a fiancé who looked good in pictures and said all the right things in front of my parents. On paper, it really did look like I had checked all the adult boxes in the right order. And my mother clung to that like it was her personal achievement. I met him at a charity event, one of those slightly pretentious local galas where people drink sparkling water in thin glasses and pretend they are changing the world by posing for photos. A friend from college had invited me saying there would be good networking and decent food, and I believed her because I was tired of microwaving frozen dinners and scrolling through a social media app in my sweatpants. He was a consultant, the kind of person who says strategy every 3 sentences and somehow makes it sound impressive instead of empty. He smiled at me like he was genuinely listening when I talked about campaigns and client expectations, which in hindsight should not have felt as special as it did. But there I was anyway, hooked on basic emotional competence in a suit. We started seeing each other after that night slowly at first, then in this steady rhythm that made my mother sigh in relief every time she heard his name. Weekends away in little rented cabins, dinners in quiet restaurants where they folded the cloth napkins like origami, walks by the water when the weather behaved. I brought him home to meet my parents 4 months in, and my mother practically staged a parade in the kitchen, throwing together appetizers and acting like she was going to be interviewed about it later. My father shook his hand and nodded in that approving way that means, "You look like someone who will not embarrass me at dinner." My sister showed up late that night because of course she did. She was 2 years younger than me and had this lifelong talent for spinning everything into a competition that I never remember signing up for. Growing up, if I got good grades, she suddenly had to get better ones. If I joined a club, she joined something more impressive. If I brought home a boyfriend, she turned into this hyper-friendly version of herself who laughed too hard at his jokes and casually mentioned her achievements like they were background noise. It was never open warfare, just this constant low-level tension like static in the air. When she walked into the living room and saw my fiancé sitting on the couch next to me, she turned on that bright performative smile she uses when she wants to be unforgettable. She hugged me, hugged him, complimented his shirt, and settled into the chair across from us, with her legs crossed at the knee like she was posing for a magazine. She touched his arm when she laughed at something he said the way she always did with men she wanted to charm. And I remember telling myself it was just her usual behavior, that I was not going to start this new phase of my life by falling into old paranoia. I decided to trust both of them, because what else was I supposed to do 16 months after that charity event he proposed? He rented a private room in a restaurant with a view of the water, the kind of place my parents would probably talk about for the next 10 years, and he went all in. There was the ring bigger than I ever thought I would wear, the speech about building a future together, and the little applause from the staff who had clearly been warned in advance. My mother cried when I called her. My father said he was proud of me like I had completed some degree. My mother immediately went into planning mode, pulling out notebooks that I swear she had been hiding for this exact moment, talking about flowers and colors and guest lists like she had been rehearsing for years. And then there was the question of the maid of honor. It sounds stupid now, but I honestly thought asking my sister would be some kind of olive branch. We had never been close in the way people imagine sisters to be. We were not the borrow each other's clothes and cry over boys together type. We were more share a hallway, tolerate each other, and avoid starting fights at family gatherings type. Still, I thought we had grown past the worst of it. We were adults, we had jobs, we had bills. Surely life had knocked some of that teen rivalry out of us. So I asked her. I stood in my parents' kitchen with a little box that had a cheap bracelet and a card that said something cheesy about standing by my side. And I watched her open it. She looked at the bracelet, then at me, and for a second, there was this flicker of something in her eyes that I could not read, like a flash of irritation, before she forced it away and replaced it with a surprised smile. She said yes, obviously. My mother clapped. My father said it was good that we were showing unity. I told myself that this time would be different, that we were grown women now and not kids fighting over who got the front seat in the car. 3 months before the wedding, the cracks started to show. My fiancé suddenly became busier than he had ever been in his entire consulting career. Apparently, there were last-minute meetings with important clients, late nights at the office. Weekends he suddenly could not spend with me because he had to catch up on reports. At first, I didn't question it, because work can get crazy, and I was also drowning in planning details in my own job. Then the pattern started to feel too convenient. Every time we had a date night planned, something came up. Every time I tried to pin him down on final details about the honeymoon, he was distracted scrolling through something on his phone or talking about how overloaded he felt. He also started criticizing me in this way that felt like a slow leak instead of a direct stab. Tiny comments that did not seem like a big deal on their own, but piled up. He would correct me in front of other people, saying things like that is not exactly what happened, or you are remembering it wrong, with this amused smile that made me feel like a child. He would comment on how I handled stress, on my tendency to overreact, on my body language when I was uncomfortable. Each comment came wrapped in a just trying to help tone, which somehow made them harder to fight back against. Meanwhile, my sister became my mother's new assistant in the wedding mission. She called me constantly to talk through every little detail, asking about flowers, dresses, seating charts, music. She came along to meetings with vendors standing next to me and talking over me half the time, making suggestions like she was the one getting married. She volunteered to help my fiancé with logistics because, as she kept saying, he looked so overwhelmed. Poor thing. One evening, I was at his place helping him sort through some paperwork, and I leaned across the table to hand him a folder. When I did, I caught the scent of a floral perfume on his shirt. Sharp and strong, completely different from the lighter one I wear every day. It hit me immediately, because I am not the kind of person who rotates perfumes. I have used the same one for years. "What is that smell?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I was not already going cold inside. He sniffed his shirt, frowned slightly, and then snapped his fingers like he had solved a puzzle. "Oh, I hugged this investor earlier. She always wears way too much perfume. It must have rubbed off." I stood there looking at him, trying to decide if that answer made sense, and I hated that my brain immediately started calculating whether my sister owned anything floral. I told myself I was being paranoid and let it go out loud, even though it stayed in the back of my mind like a sticky note I refused to throw away. A week later, I was in his car moving my bag from the back seat to the front when my hand brushed against something small and metallic near the console. I picked it up and my stomach dropped. It was an earring, silver simple, and very familiar because I had watched my sister wear that exact pair at family dinners more times than I wanted to admit. I held it up. "Whose is this?" He barely looked at it and said too quickly, "Your sister's. Her car was in the shop last week, remember? I gave her a ride to a store." The next day, I casually asked my sister about it while we sat at my parents' dining table, pretending to be close. I mentioned the ride, the earring, the whole thing, making it sound like small talk. She did not blink. "Oh yeah," she said in the exact same tone he had used. "My car was acting up. He gave me a ride to a store. My earring must have fallen off." The phrasing was so similar it felt rehearsed, like they had compared notes. You know that feeling when you realize something is wrong, but you are not ready to admit it out loud, even to yourself. That was me. I slept less, ate less, and spent my nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about every interaction they had ever had in front of me. My therapist, who I finally dragged myself back to, used words like hypervigilance and trauma response, and I nodded while thinking, yeah, or maybe everyone is lying to me. I lost weight without trying. 7 pounds in 3 weeks. Food tasted like cardboard. Coffee kept my body moving but did nothing for my brain. My boss told me I looked tired in that way people use when they want to say you look terrible without sounding rude. I told everyone I was just stressed because of the wedding, and they nodded like that explained everything. The night everything snapped, I was staying at my parents' house after a family gathering because it was late, and my father insisted it was safer. My fiancé had said he would spend the night there too and leave early for a meeting in the morning. We went to bed in the same room I had decorated as a teenager, which already felt wrong, like mixing two different lives that were not supposed to collide. Somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and reached for him. My hand hit an empty mattress. The bathroom light was off. The house was quiet. At first, I told myself he was in the kitchen getting water, but the longer I lay there in the dark, the more my chest tightened. I got up, opened the door, and listened. I heard low voices down the hall, a murmur I could not quite make out. I followed the sound barefoot on the familiar hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door to the guest room was slightly open, just enough to catch light and shadows. I heard his voice, low, soothing, and then my sister's voice, this whispery tone she uses when she wants to sound gentle. He said something about needing to get up early, about sleeping separately so he would not wake me. She laughed softly. You know those moments when your body moves before your brain decides anything? I pushed the door open. There they were. My fiancé sitting on the edge of the bed, my sister leaning in too close, her hand on his shoulder, their faces inches apart. They jumped like guilty teenagers caught by a parent, which is funny because technically I was the one being treated like a child in that house. My sister stared at me, eyes wide, then rolled them like I was being dramatic. We were just talking, she said. I did not say anything. I just looked at him. He stood up, hands raised like that would make him innocent. We could not sleep, he said. We were just talking about the wedding. I did not want to wake you. Something in me shut down. I turned around, went back to my childhood bedroom and locked the door. I did not sleep again that night. I stared at the wall until the sun came up. And by morning, I had convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting, that it had just looked worse than it was, that I was tired and anxious and reading into things. Yes, I know how that sounds. You do not have to yell at me. I am yelling at myself now, a few days later. I decided to surprise him at his office with lunch because apparently I was still trying to be the kind of fiancé who brings sandwiches to stressed men and button-downs. I picked up his favorite order from a little shop near his building and went over on my lunch break. When I got there, his assistant looked nervous the second she saw me. She smiled too quickly and told me he was in a very important meeting and probably would not be available for a while. I said I would wait. She told me maybe it was better to reschedule. It was weird enough that I almost left, but stubbornness is a powerful force when you are trying to convince yourself you are in control. She left the reception desk for a minute to grab something from another floor, and I was left standing in this quiet hallway with my paper bag of food. The door to his office was slightly ajar, because of course it was. I heard a laugh I knew too well. My sister's laugh. My body moved again before my brain did. I pushed the door open with the hand that was not holding the lunch bag. He was there standing behind his desk. She was there sitting on the edge of it, leaned back slightly, his hand on her waist, her hand gripping his tie. They were kissing. Not a we tripped and fell, not a misunderstanding, full deliberate, familiar. I stood there holding a bag of sandwiches like an idiot, and for a second nobody moved. Then she pulled back, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and actually had the nerve to look annoyed that I had interrupted. Okay, I said. I do not even know why that was the first word out of my mouth, but there it was hanging in the air like a broken piece of glass. Okay. She straightened up, adjusted her shirt, and stepped toward me like this was going to be a regular conversation. You, clears throat, we're going to find out anyway, she said. Honestly, it is better this way. He started with, listen, Kendra, it is not what you think, which was so ridiculously insulting that I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of laugh you let out when your brain short-circuits and decides that this is not reality anymore. Not what I think, I repeated. You are kissing my sister in your office during work hours while I am on my lunch break bringing you food. How exactly am I supposed to interpret that? My sister stepped in like she was proud to take center stage. We have been seeing each other for a while, she said. Since before the engagement party, feelings just changed. 5 months, he said, like he could not stop himself from providing a detail that no one had asked for. It has been 5 months. 5 months. That meant while I was trying on dresses, while my mother was picking out centerpieces, while I was pretending that the floral perfume and the earring were coincidences, while my therapist was telling me to trust my gut, I felt the floor under my feet, the weight of the bag in my hand, the pressure in my chest. I felt my face burning, my throat closing, tears already gathering, even though I did not want to cry in front of them. I am leaving, I said. My voice sounded flat and far away like it belonged to someone else. Do not come after me. Do not call me. Do not text me. He started to move around the desk, saying my name, reaching out, and I stepped back like his hands were on fire. My sister opened her mouth like she was going to explain something, like there was any explanation that would make this less disgusting, and I just shook my head. I walked out down the hallway, pasted the assistant who had clearly known something and could not meet my eyes. I made it to the parking lot before everything caught up to me. I leaned against my car and finally broke. Full body sobbing. The kind where you cannot breathe and your vision tunnels and you are half convinced you might actually pass out. I dropped the bag of food. It burst open on the pavement and part of my brain clocked that hot sauce was spreading across the asphalt like blood in a bad movie. I do not know how long I stayed there. Long enough for my phone to buzz with calls I ignored. Long enough for a stranger to ask if I was okay, and for me to say yes when I definitely was not. Eventually, I climbed into the car, locked the doors, and just sat there. I typed a text to my sister that was basically a multi-paragraph nuclear bomb detailing every dirty thing I was thinking, listing every act of betrayal, every moment I had given her the benefit of the doubt. Then I deleted it. Typed another one, shorter but still lethal. Deleted that too. I must have written and erased messages a dozen times, my thumb hovering over send like a trigger I could not quite pull. Yes, I regret not sending at least one of them. The anger would have loved the release. The guilt would have eaten me alive after. It was a lose-lose situation. By the time I drove back to my apartment, I was drained and numb. I went straight to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and sat on the floor under the spray in my clothes like some cliché drama character. But I did not care. I stayed there until the water turned cold and my skin wrinkled. And then I dragged myself out and collapsed on the bathroom mat. That is where my parents found me. My mother had been calling nonstop. When I did not answer, she apparently decided to track me down because she and my father showed up with their spare key. They opened the door, called my name, and then my mother screamed when she saw me curled up on the floor, soaked with mascara, smeared down my cheeks. She thought something terrible had happened. She was right, just not in the way she imagined. They wrapped me in towels and sat me on the couch. It took me a while to get the words out, but eventually I told them. I described the office, the kiss, the timeline, the 5 months. My father's face went red. That deep, dangerous shade you see right before someone explodes. My mother kept saying, "No, no, that is not possible." Because denial is apparently hereditary in our family. My father swore he was going to go and take care of it, which I think was his way of saying he wanted to punch my ex-fiancé. And honestly, I was not totally against the idea in that moment, but my mother grabbed his arm and told him that getting arrested would not help the situation. She shifted into practical mode, the one she uses when someone is sick or there is a crisis. She called vendors, canceled bookings, started making lists. She was weirdly efficient while I sat there shaking. The ring went back the next day. I did not hand it to him in person. I put it in a little box, wrote a short note that said, "We are done," and left it with the doorman at his building. He called me 7 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail, then deleted them without listening. The fallout in our social circle was exactly what you would expect from people who love drama but hate responsibility. Some friends reached out to support me, saying they had always thought something was off, that they were on my side. Others stayed neutral, which is just cowardice with better branding. One woman who I had considered close sent me a message that said, "I really do not want to get involved." Like this was a neighborhood dispute about a parking spot and not my entire life imploding. The worst part was finding out how many people had noticed things between my sister and my ex and decided not to tell me. "They always flirted," one acquaintance said later. "We figured it was harmless." Another mentioned how they seemed really comfortable together at gatherings. Apparently, the world watched the slow-motion car crash and thought, this is none of my business. One of the vendors called my mother and casually mentioned that my sister had already been in touch to adjust some details, talking about reusing the arrangements and keeping the theme. My mother told me that like she was giving a weather report and I had to leave the room before I threw something at the wall. The idea that my sister was sliding into the wedding plan I had made, like swapping names on a form, made me feel physically sick. We had one family dinner where my mother insisted we should all talk things through. My father sat at the head of the table, gripping his fork so hard I thought it might snap. I sat there staring at my plate. My sister walked in with this infuriating mix of guilt and defiance on her face. Halfway through the meal, she slammed her fork down and said, "For once I get something before you do, and suddenly I am the villain. You have always had everything, and I was just supposed to clap from the sidelines." I looked at her, genuinely stunned. "You getting something before me is sleeping with my fiancé," I said. "That is the hill you want to die on, that you finally won." My mother started crying. My father yelled. My sister stormed out. I sat there thinking, this is what my family thinks love looks like. The months after that were ugly in a dull, repetitive way. I kept up with therapy because falling apart in front of a stranger who is paid to listen is better than falling apart at my desk. I cried in the shower almost every day. I stalked their profiles on a social media app, checking for pictures of them together, reading comments from people congratulating them like they were some fairy tale couple instead of 2 people who had stepped on me like I was a stepping stone. I watched as they quietly made things official. I found out about their civil ceremony not from my parents, but because a neighbor of my parents tagged them in a photo. My mother called me after that, voice trembling, saying she had not known they were doing it that quickly and that she had begged them to wait. I believed her, but it did not make it hurt less. Work stopped being a place where I could at least pretend to be functional. My performance tanked. I had a full breakdown in the bathroom 10 minutes before a big pitch and still tried to do the presentation with red eyes and a shaky voice. The client chose another agency. My boss pulled me into a conference room later and asked if I needed a leave of absence. One night, after drinking an entire bottle of wine alone in my living room, I stared at the ceiling and realized that if I stayed in that city, I was going to slowly dissolve. Everything reminded me of them. The restaurant where he had proposed, the street where my sister and I had taken pictures pretending we were close, the office building where I had walked in with sandwiches and walked out with my heart in pieces. Around that time, an opening came up in our company's branch in the middle of the country. A more senior position, more responsibility, a bigger paycheck. The manager there had suddenly resigned, and they needed someone experienced to take over. My boss mentioned it gently, like she was trying not to scare me with an opportunity. My mother, when I brought it up, asked if running away would really fix anything. You will still have the same memories, she said, fiddling with a spoon at the kitchen table. You will still feel the same pain. I will not run into them at the grocery store. I said, that is enough for now. I applied. I got the position. I packed my life into boxes and watched my apartment empty out. The night before I left, I opened my sister's profile one last time. There she was, smiling in a white dress that was not the dress I had chosen, standing next to my ex, who was wearing the same smug expression he had worn when he slid the ring onto my finger. I closed the app, turned off my phone, and told myself that the version of my life where I married him officially died that day. Moving to the new city felt like stepping into a parallel universe where no one knew the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I rented a small place near the office, threw myself into work harder than I ever had, and smiled politely at people who commented on my dedication. I made friends with a colleague in human resources who gently pulled me into a book club so I would not spend every weekend alone. I also set a rule with my mother. No more updates about my sister unless there was an actual emergency. No casual mentions, no little comments about how happy they look, no comparisons. The first time she slipped and said something about them going on a trip, I snapped completely. I raised my voice, told her I did not want to hear my sister's name again, and hung up on her. Then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried because I hated talking to my mother like that. But I hated hearing about them even more. I blocked my sister and my ex on every app I could think of. I deleted their numbers. I told mutual friends that if they wanted to stay in my life, they could not bring them up. Some friends understood. Others got defensive, saying I was being too extreme, and I ended up cutting them off too. Very fun chapter of life. Highly do not recommend. Every once in a while, the past would ambush me. Anyway, a colleague walked into a meeting one afternoon wearing a strong floral perfume that hit my nose and sent me straight back to the moment I had sniffed my ex's shirt. I had to excuse myself and hide in the bathroom until my hands stopped shaking. Months passed. My therapist said I was doing the work. I felt like I was mostly just surviving. About 4 months after I moved, my company sent me to a regional conference in another city. You know the type. Endless panels about trends. Networking sessions where you trade business cards with strangers you will never email, forced small talk over lukewarm coffee. I went because my position required it, not because I actually wanted to be there. On the first night, there was a dinner for participants assigned seating because someone in planning hates freedom. I ended up next to a man who introduced himself as an analyst recently transferred from another branch. He was not excessively charming. He did not have that polished I am used to being the center of attention energy that my ex had. He was quieter, more observant. He asked me questions about my job and actually listened to the answers without constantly pivoting back to his accomplishments. We talked about work at first, then about books, then about the weird things people say in performance reviews. He made me laugh a couple of times. Real laughing, not the polite kind, when the dinner was over. He asked for my card and said he would email me some resources he had mentioned. I said, sure. He actually followed up. We started exchanging messages about projects, sending each other reports and ideas. It stayed in the professional lane for a while, but there was a warmth to it that I noticed and tried very hard not to overthink. My colleague in human resources picked up on it faster than I did. One day she looked at my phone lighting up with his name and raised an eyebrow. He likes you, she said. He is being friendly, I said. She gave me the kind of look you give a friend you love, but whose denial is exhausting. Several months later, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner while he was in town for meetings. I stared at the message for a solid 10 minutes before answering. My stomach flipped. My hands felt weirdly cold. We met at a small restaurant near my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a place with decent food and quiet corners. I wore jeans and a top that made me feel like I had put in effort without screaming, "This is a date." The conversation started easy enough. We talked about work, our coworkers, the way company leadership pretended to understand ground-level problems. Eventually, the topic shifted to books and movies, then to childhood stories, and for a moment, I forgot to be on guard. Then he asked a completely harmless question about whether I had always lived on the east side before moving to the middle of the country. It was innocent. He did not know what he was poking. I felt it like a wave. The room tilted. My chest tightened. My hands started shaking under the table. I grabbed my water and could not get it to my mouth without the glass clinking against my teeth. "Hey," he said, noticing immediately. "Are you okay?" I tried to say yes, but the word got stuck. My throat closed up and suddenly I was gasping. Full panic attack in public, my vision tunneled, my ears rang, and I could hear myself making these embarrassing sounds that did not even feel human. He did not freak out. That is what I remember most. He did not make a scene, did not rush me, did not pepper me with questions. He just leaned in, kept his voice low and calm, and said, "Breathe with me. Okay, in, out, just focus on the sound of my voice." He counted breaths quietly until mine started to steady. He asked if I wanted to leave, and I nodded. He paid the check without making me feel guilty, walked me to my car, and asked if I felt safe to drive home. I said yes, even though I still felt like a wrung-out towel. The next day, flowers showed up at my office. Not a cliché romantic bouquet, just a small arrangement with a note that said, "No pressure. I hope you're okay." I spent several hours staring at that note before I called him that night. When he picked up, I blurted out the story about my ex and my sister. I told him everything from the perfume to the earring to the office kiss to the wedding that never happened. I cried while I talked. I apologized for crying. I apologized for apologizing. He listened. Then he told me about his ex-wife, how she had left him for a coworker, how humiliating it had been to walk into the break room and hear people lower their voices, how he had lost not just a marriage, but also some of his professional standing because she had stayed in the department and people naturally gravitated toward her side. There was this weird, horrible comfort in knowing that someone else understood being chosen last in a competition you did not know you were in. Things between us grew slowly after that. He did not push, he did not flood my phone with messages, but he stayed consistent. He checked in, he respected boundaries I did not even know how to articulate yet. When he introduced me to his sister on a video call, he did it casually like it was not some big audition. And she was friendly without interrogating me. Of course, because nothing can ever be simple. There was one day when he disappeared. Not literally, obviously, but he stopped responding to messages. Hours passed. I went from mildly annoyed to spiraling. My brain replayed the worst day of my life, convinced history was repeating itself. When he finally called that night, he sounded exhausted. His mother had been rushed to the hospital in another city, and he had gotten on the first flight out. His phone had died, and he had not thought to borrow a charger in the chaos. I told him that disappearing without a word, even for a good reason, hit a nerve for me, that it made me feel like the ground had been yanked out from under me again. I expected him to tell me I was being dramatic. Instead, he apologized sincerely. He did not get defensive. He said he understood and that he would do better about communicating in emergencies. We kept going. A year after I moved, I got promoted to director. A real one, not just in my email signature. It was the kind of thing younger me would have screamed about on the phone to my mother, but older me just took a deep breath and sat with the complicated mix of pride and grief. My circle slowly expanded. I met people through community events, through my colleague in human resources, through my partner. We built a life that did not revolve around my past. My parents came to visit once. My mother walked through my small, neat place and tried not to comment on how far it was from the ocean. She asked about my partner. She liked him. My father seemed relieved that he was calm and grounded, not flashy. But my sister's shadow still hung over any conversation about family. My mother slipped sometimes talking about how your sister and her husband bought a big house or how they went on this beautiful trip, and each time I cut her off. I did not want the updates. She eventually learned. Then came the weekend trip that changed everything again. My partner suggested we get away for a couple of days to a small town known for its vineyards and quiet streets. We drove out, stayed in a cozy inn, went to tastings, pretended we knew anything about notes and finishes. On the second night, we were sitting under string lights in a garden, and he looked more nervous than I had ever seen him. He pulled out a ring. I felt every muscle in my body tense. For a split second, I was back in that private room with a view of the water and a man who had promised me forever with one hand while texting my sister with the other. Then I breathed, looked at the man in front of me. He was not my ex. He was the one who had held my hand through panic attacks, who had listened to my ugly stories, who had apologized when he messed up instead of turning it around on me. He asked if I wanted to marry him, and for the first time the word yes felt like something I was choosing, not something I was performing. We had a small wedding, 30 people. Our co-workers who had become real friends, his sister, my parents. No elaborate ballroom, no big performance, just vows we wrote ourselves and dinner afterward, where people actually talked to each other instead of posing for photos. My mother begged me to invite my sister as a gesture, and I eventually sent an invitation more to keep the peace than anything else. The response came in a short message saying she had a scheduling conflict but wished us well. I think I actually preferred that. I did not want her anywhere near that day. We bought a modest house together, nothing giant or dramatic, just a place with enough room for an office and a guest room. We painted walls ourselves. We argued about where to put furniture and laughed about it later. We found a routine that felt boring in the best possible way. Months into the marriage, during a dinner with some colleagues of his, Someone mentioned an old account that had been the subject of a brutal competition in the industry years ago. They joked about how my partner had stolen it right out from under another guy, and my partner laughed a little awkwardly and moved the conversation along. On the way home, I asked him about it. He hesitated. You know how small the industry is, he said. People end up crossing paths without knowing it. What does that mean? I pressed. He sighed. That account, I landed the one they were talking about. Your ex was the one who lost it. He had been courting them for months. I came in late and closed the deal. I stared at him. My chest started to feel tight again. Not in the panic way, but in a slow, heavy way. And you did not tell me this because I did not want our relationship to be built on me being the guy who beat him. He said, I wanted you to choose me for me, not because I accidentally look like karma. Part of me understood. Another part of me felt blindsided, like there was this whole layer of the story I had not been told. We fought about it, not a screaming match, but a real argument with raised voices and hurt feelings. I told him that hiding it made me feel like there were other things he was not telling me. He told me he was trying to protect us from turning into a revenge fantasy. We ended up seeing a counselor for a few sessions. It was humbling, sitting in a room explaining to a stranger why we were upset about a deal that had happened before we even met, but it helped. We agreed on transparency going forward, even when something seemed like a minor detail. Around the same time, we started trying to have a baby. It turned out to be more complicated than we expected. Months went by with negative tests. Every single one felt like a little failure, like my body was keeping score, and I was losing. I had painful periods for years and always brushed them off as just how it is. A specialist finally told me I had mild endometriosis. Treatable, but not simple. While we were processing all of that, my mother called one night, sounding subdued in a way that scared me more than if she had been hysterical. She said she had been dealing with indigestion, back pain, and weight loss for months, but had not wanted to worry anyone. She finally went to the doctor. The test came back. It was pancreatic cancer, advanced, already spread. I flew back to my hometown with my partner as soon as we could. Walking into my parents' house felt like stepping into a time machine. The furniture was the same, the pictures on the wall the same, but my mother looked smaller, like someone had turned down her brightness. We met with doctors, talked about options, and heard the same thing over and over. They could try to slow it down, make her comfortable, but there would be no miracle cure. My mother tried to stay upbeat. She made jokes about finally losing weight in a way diet ads would never approve of. At night, when everyone else was asleep, I heard her sobbing quietly in her bedroom. I took a leave from work and moved back in for a while. My partner commuted back and forth as much as he could. I cooked bland soups and rearranged pillows and listened to my mother tell the same stories 3 times because the medication made her foggy. In one of the quieter moments, she reached for my hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. I made mistakes with you girls, she said. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I let things slide that I should not have. I should have protected you better from each other. I swallowed hard. You cannot fix everything now, I said. I know, she whispered. But I need to know that when I am gone, you will at least try not to hate each other. I knew what she was asking. I also knew I could not promise what she wanted, so I gave her a softer version. I will try not to let the hatred win, I said. It was the most honest thing I could offer. She died 3 days later, early in the morning with me. My father, my partner, and yes, my brother-in-law at her bedside. The room was too quiet when she took her last breath. My father made a sound I had never heard from him before. Something between a cry and a roar. I felt like someone had cut the last rope tying me to any version of my old family that could be fixed. I was the one who texted my sister. It felt insane that this was how we were communicating such a huge thing. But that is where we were. I kept it short. Mom is gone. We are at the house. She arrived faster than I thought she would with my ex in tow. They hugged my father. She hugged me, and for a second my body remembered what it felt like to lean on her as a kid. Then recoiled. We worked together to make arrangements because there was no other option. Someone had to pick out a casket. Someone had to talk to the man at the funeral home and answer questions about flowers and music. The day of the funeral, the sky decided to lean into the mood and give us a thin, cold rain. People packed into the chapel, neighbors who remembered us as kids, old friends of my parents, a few faces I barely recognized. I stayed near my father, making sure he did not tip over. My sister and my ex sat a few rows away at first, then drifted closer as people mingled before the service started. I felt eyes on us, heard whispers. The story had gotten around over the years clearly. People love a scandal. One of the women who had chosen my ex's side back then walked up to me like nothing had happened, hugging me and telling me how sorry she was, as if she had not sent that "I do not want to get involved" message and then gone to their wedding. I smiled tightly and said thanks because funerals are not the place for the confrontations I fantasize about. At one point, my sister tugged on my sleeve and asked if we could talk somewhere private. I did not want to. Every cell in my body resisted, but my father looked at me with red, exhausted eyes, and I knew he was desperate for his daughters not to start a screaming match in front of the casket. She pulled me into a side room, and of course my ex followed like a shadow hovering near the doorway with his arms crossed. She started with this fake soft voice. "You look tired," she said, as if we were at brunch and I had just mentioned a busy week. "Have you been taking care of yourself out there? I worry about you being all alone." I almost laughed. "I am not alone," I said. "I have a husband. I have a life." She glanced at my ring fiddled with her own. "I know. I just mean emotionally. It must be hard being so far." I could feel the old pattern trying to reassert itself. She elevates herself, diminishes me, and I either shrink or blow up. Before I could pick a lane, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my husband. I texted him back with shaking hands. "Please get here now. I need you." When he arrived, he walked into the room and came straight to me. My ex went pale the second he recognized him. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "You two know each other?" my sister asked, confusion breaking through her mask. "Oh, we have crossed paths," my husband said calmly. "Years ago, professionally, my ex cleared his throat and tried to compose himself. We worked on the same account from different firms," he said. He undercut me. My husband smiled slightly. "I gave them a better strategy," he said. They made a choice. The air in the room thinned. I could almost hear the puzzle pieces clicking into place in my sister's head. She said my husband's name out loud, then the name of his company, and I saw the moment she realized he was the one who had landed the account my ex had spent months bragging about. "Funny how life works," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. The whispers spread. "You can always tell when gossip is making the rounds. The energy shifts. People group together in little clusters, glancing over like they are trying not to stare." In the middle of all this, my father's shoulders slumped, and he started breathing weirdly. His face went gray, and he grabbed at his chest. Everyone panicked at once. Someone yelled for a doctor, and luckily one of my parents' neighbors' sons was there. A physician who checked his pulse and blood pressure right there in a side room and declared it a panic attack, not a heart attack. They gave him water, made him sit down, and I sat next to him holding his hand while he cried. After things calmed a little, my sister and I ended up alone again for a moment. She was shaken not just from our father's episode, but from the entire tangled mess. Her voice was lower when she spoke. "You really moved on," she said. "You got the career, the promotion, the husband who wins big accounts, and you got the man you wanted so badly you were willing to blow up your own family for him." Clear's throat said, "How is that working out?" She flinched. I watched the mask slip just a little enough to show the cracks underneath. Later after the service, after the burial, under that annoying rain, after the endless condolences and casseroles, I went back to my parents' house with my husband. The living room was full of people talking too loudly, eating food. They did not need filling the space because silence is apparently intolerable after a death. My ex drank more than he should have. I watched him from across the room. His tie loosened, his laugh too harsh. My sister hovered near him, looking like someone constantly bracing for impact. The next day, when the house finally quieted down, my sister showed up alone. She knocked softly on the door, and my father let her in with a tired sigh. She asked if she could talk to me privately. We went up to my old bedroom because apparently trauma loves full circles. She closed the door and leaned against it like she was afraid she might run away. "I am not happy," she said without any buildup. "He is controlling. He criticizes everything I do. He monitors my spending, but he is the one racking up debt to keep up appearances. We are drowning financially, but no one can know because he has an image." I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. For the first time, I saw not just the girl who took what I had, but a woman who had cornered herself into a life she did not know how to leave. I met with a lawyer. She admitted it is not going to be easy. I signed a prenup I did not really read because I was so focused on beating you to the altar. He made sure everything is tied up in a way that makes leaving complicated. I will not get the house. I will not get much at all. I will get freedom. I guess that is still something I said. She laughed bitterly. "You must be thrilled. Karma, right?" I looked at her in silence for a few seconds, just taking in the mess she had walked herself into. Then I answered, my voice calm and colder than I expected. "You know what, I am not thrilled, but I'm also not sad for you. You made your choice knowing exactly what it would cost. You destroyed our family, humiliated me, and took him knowing he was trash. Now you want sympathy from me." She opened her mouth to say something, but I lifted my hand to stop her. "I spent months thinking I owed you something," I said. "That may be because we share blood, I had to find a way to forgive you, but I do not. You do not get my forgiveness. You do not get my pity. You get what you earned, absolutely nothing from me. She started to cry quiet at first. Then, with those ragged little sobs she used to fake as a kid to get our parents' attention. I did not move. I just watched her completely done. I need to go help our father, I said, finally standing up. You should probably leave before this gets uglier. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. So that is it, she asked. You are just done with me. I was done with you the second I walked into that office and saw you on his desk. And I said, I just did not admit it to myself until now. Mom wanted us to try not to hate each other. I tried, but trying does not mean I have to let you back into my life. I walked out of the room without looking back. I heard her sobbing behind me, but I did not stop. In the days that followed, we handled the logistics of the funeral like coworkers on a project we both hated. Short-clipped messages about schedules, flowers, and paperwork. Everything went through our father. We were never alone in the same room again. I went back to my life in the middle of the country a few days later carrying a little box of my mother's things and a surprisingly clear sense of closure. Grief for her anger that would probably never fully burn out, something almost like pity for my sister. A few weeks after I returned, right around the time my husband and I were seriously considering starting medical procedures for fertility, I missed a period. I did not think much of it at first because stress had been playing ping pong with my cycle for months. Then I missed another. I took a test in the bathroom, staring at the little window like it was going to personally insult me. It came back positive. I sat on the floor and laughed, then cried, then laughed again, because apparently my body had decided that between funerals and possible divorce drama and unresolved childhood wounds, this was the moment to finally cooperate. Telling my husband was one of the purest pockets of joy I have ever experienced. For a moment, it was just us in our house with this tiny piece of good news floating between us like a fragile bubble. I told my father next. He cried in a good way this time, saying that my mother would have loved to see it. I did not tell my sister. Not a message, not through my father, not at all. She did not get to be part of this. A few weeks later, my father mentioned he had accidentally let it slip during a phone call with her. She had apparently asked how I was doing, and he said, "Oh, you know, excited about becoming a grandmother." There was a long silence on her end. She sent me a message later that day, just congratulations. I am happy for you. I read it, felt nothing, and deleted it without responding. I did not block her. That would have required acknowledging she mattered enough to block. I just never replied, ever. My father told me months later that my sister had finally left my ex. The divorce was brutal. She lost the house, most of the money, her social circle. She moved into a small apartment and got a regular job. My father sighed when he told me, clearly hoping I would soften. I did not. Good. I said she wanted him so badly. Now she knows exactly what he is worth. My father looked disappointed, but I was done pretending to care. She made her bed. She could lie in it alone. I heard through my father that she tried to reach out a few more times over the following year. Messages I never opened. A card at Christmas I threw away unopened. An attempt to show up at my father's house when I was visiting. I left through the back door before she arrived. We do not talk. Not occasionally. Not on holidays. Not ever. My father asks sometimes if I would consider letting her meet the baby. My answer is always the same. No. He stopped asking after the third time. She does not get pictures. She does not get updates. She does not get to know if my child is a boy or a girl until my father accidentally mentions it months after the birth. She is not part of this story anymore. She does not get a redemption arc. I still flinch when I catch a whiff of sharp floral perfume in a crowded room, not because it makes me think of her, but because it reminds me of the version of myself who ignored her gut. That woman is gone. I do not ignore my instincts anymore. Trust does not regrow just because time passes. But here is what I do know. If my ex and my sister had not detonated my life when they did, I would probably have married him, moved into some house my parents approved of, had kids with a man who talked down to me and flirted with anyone who laughed at his jokes. I would have stayed in that coastal city, orbiting around my family's expectations, always trying to keep the peace while slowly disappearing. Instead, I moved. I broke. I rebuilt. I fell apart again. I picked up the pieces so many times that I lost track of which version of myself I was trying to assemble. And somehow through all that, I ended up in a life that actually feels like mine. A job I earned. A partner who shows up when my chest tightens instead of causing it. A baby who will grow up in a house where love is not a competition. The scars are still there. I still shake sometimes when I talk about it. I still have dreams where I am walking into that office with a bag of sandwiches. I still wake up angry. Healing is not a straight line. It is more like a spiral you trip over again and again. But if you are asking me whether my sister stole my man here, is what I will tell you now with my whole chest. She did not steal anything. She took out the trash for me, and now she can keep it. I do not want him back. I do not want her back. I do not want anything from either of them, except for them to stay exactly where they are, far away from me and everything I have built. My sister wanted to win so badly that she grabbed a bomb thinking it was a trophy. That is on her. I have moved on. She has not. And honestly, that is the best revenge I ever planned. She freed up my life in the ugliest, most painful way possible. And I will be dealing with the fallout for years. But I will never again have to sit across a table wondering if the man holding my hand is secretly waiting for someone else to walk into the room. I know some people would wrap this kind of story up with a neat bow like, and now everything is perfect, and I have completely forgiven everyone, but that is not where I am. I do not live in that kind of movie. I still get irrationally tense when an unknown number calls my phone because some part of me expects another emotional grenade. There are days when I am feeding my baby in the middle of the night, half asleep, and my mind drifts back to the girl I was sitting on the bathroom floor in that apartment, soaked and shaking, thinking there was no way life would ever feel normal again. I wish I could go back and sit next to her. I would not tell her to be strong because she already was. I would just tell her that she was allowed to let things break that were never meant to last. My father sometimes mentions her in passing, testing to see if I will soften. I do not. He has learned to keep her life and mine completely separate. When he visits me, he does not bring her up. When he visits her, which I assume he does, though we do not discuss it, he does not mention me. I do not think about what she is doing. I do not check her social media because I deleted every trace of her years ago. I do not wonder if she is happy or sad or regretful. She is a person who used to be my sister, and now she is just someone I used to know who made the worst choice possible. People sometimes ask if I will ever forgive her. My answer is simple. Forgiveness is for people who want to repair something. I do not want to repair this. I want it to stay exactly where it is, dead and buried with the version of my life she destroyed. Do I hate my sister? No. Hate requires energy I do not have for her anymore. What I feel is simpler and colder. Indifference. She is out there somewhere living with the consequences of her choices, and I am here living with mine. The difference is, my choices led me to a life I actually want. Hers led her to a small apartment and a man who treats her like garbage. I did not cause that. She did, and I have zero obligation to care. My father asks about her more often lately, probably scared that if he dies, we will drift apart completely. I tell him the truth. If something happens to you, I will handle whatever needs to be handled. But I will not have a relationship with her. We will communicate through lawyers if necessary. That is it. He looks sad when I say it, but he does not argue. He knows me well enough to know I mean it. But I will also not hand them the matchbox again. Sometimes people who hear my story say things like, I could never forgive that. Or on the other extreme, family is family. You have to move past it. Oh. I think both sides are missing the point. It is not about a clean decision stamped with approval. It is about waking up every day and choosing where to place people in your life so you can actually live it without bleeding out emotionally. There's a version of my life where I stayed angry forever, where every new good thing was immediately overshadowed by thoughts of how they ruined everything. That version of me would be stuck in the past, replaying the office scene on loop until it replaced everything else. I flirted with that version for a while. It felt safe in a twisted way, because if you never stop looking backward, you never have to risk trusting anything new. The life I am in now still carries all the same scars, but it has more rooms in it. There is space for grief, for rage, for tiny, stupid moments of happiness, like my husband making bad jokes while we assemble furniture, or my baby grabbing my finger like I am the only stable thing in the room. When I catch myself spiraling, I try to remember that the worst part of the story is not the end of it. The worst part is just the part that tried the hardest to convince me that it was all I would ever be. I am not the woman abandoned at an office door holding a bag of food anymore. I am not the woman crying under cold shower water, waiting for someone to rescue me from my own bathroom. I am the woman who moved, who took the promotion, who cried in a restaurant in front of a man who did not run away. I am the woman who said yes a second time, knowing exactly how wrong it could go, and still choosing to open that door. I am the woman who told her sister to her face that some things cannot be undone even if you regret them later. If you want a moral, I do not really have one. This is not a story about karma neatly sorting everyone into boxes. My sister is still out there rebuilding her life in that small apartment, My ex is probably still trying to impress people at networking events, pretending his life did not crack down the middle. My father is learning to live without my mother wandering from room to room in that house that holds too many memories. I am here in my own house in the middle of the country, learning how to hold joy and pain in the same day without feeling like a fraud. What I can tell you is this. If someone shows you that they are willing to climb over you to reach what they want, believe them. Do not wait for them to suddenly grow a conscience in the exact moment you need them to choose you. And if your own family cheers them on while you are bleeding, you are allowed to step back. You are allowed to build a life without inviting them to sit in the front row. People love to say blood is thicker than water, like it is a spell that solves everything. They forget that you can drown in both. I am not interested in drowning for anyone anymore. I will visit the shore, I will wave, I will check in, but my home is on land. I chose myself. In a life I built from the pieces they thought were useless. So no, I do not send my sister anything at all. No long messages about forgiveness, no carefully worded updates, no attempts to make her feel better about what she did. The block between us is not temporary, it is the foundation I built my new life on. For now. The fact that I can go entire days without thinking about her feels like enough. Maybe one day I will go months, maybe years. Maybe I will never think of her at all unless someone says her name out loud. Honestly, that sounds perfect to me. Right now, I am busy learning how to live in a house where no one is competing with me for a spotlight that never should have existed in the first place. I am busy loving a child who will grow up hearing that love does not require stepping on anyone to feel real. I am busy being grateful in a quiet, stubborn way that the worst night of my life did not get the final.